deliberately sent somewhere to fail, to bleed out on a forgotten frontier while powerful men in marble halls waited for the news of your death like it was just another political transaction. Now imagine you're 25 years old. You've spent your entire life buried in philosophy books in Athens, debating the nature of existence, reading Plato under olive trees. You've probably never held a real sword, never seen a man die violently in front of you. Well, never smelled blood mixed with mud and fear. And then overnight, you're given command of a broken army on the most dangerous border of the Roman Empire. Your soldiers are shattered by it. They have lost faith in Rome, in their commanders, in themselves. The enemy across the river outnumbers you nearly 3-1. And everyone, your own troops, your enemies, even your own emperor, believes you were sent there as a sacrifice. A convenient death wrapped in imperial purple. But here's where the story takes a turn nobody saw coming. That young philosopher didn't just survive. He delivered one of the most devastating military victories in Roman history. A battle so brutal, so perfectly executed, that he lost only 243 men, while the enemy left over 6,000 corpses rotting in the August sun. A victory so complete that his own soldiers tried to crown him emperor right there on the battlefield. And he had to refuse, knowing that accepting would tear the empire apart. This is the story of the Battle of Strasbourg. The year was 357 AD, and a man named Julian proved that even in Rome's twilight, the legions could still be the deadliest military force the world had ever seen. Let's go back to understand how we got here. By the middle of the 4th century, Rome wasn't the unstoppable giant it used to be. The frontiers that had once been iron walls separating civilization from chaos were crumbling. And nowhere was this collapse more visible than in Gaul, modern-day France. The Rhine River, which had marked the edge of Roman power for centuries, had become a meaningless line in the dirt. On the other side of that river lived the Alamanni, a confederation of Germanic tribes who had watched Rome weaken for decades. They weren't just raiding anymore. They weren't hitting villages and running back across the border. No, they were conquering. City after city fell. Roman citizens were being enslaved by the thousands. Farms burned. Roads became death traps. The entire province was bleeding, and Rome couldn't stop it. Back in the imperial court, Emperor Constantius II had a problem. He needed someone to restore order in Gaul. But here's the thing about emperors in the late Roman period. They were paranoid, dangerously paranoid. Constantius couldn't send a capable general because a capable general might win too many victories, might become too popular, might start thinking he deserved the purple robe himself. So Constantius made what he thought was a clever decision. He sent his young cousin Julian, a bookworm, a philosopher, a man with no military experience whatsoever. He gave Julian the title of Caesar, junior emperor, but everyone understood what this really was. It was a death sentence dressed up in ceremony. Julian would sign some papers, make some appearances, and eventually die in some forgettable skirmish. Problem solved. What Constantius didn't understand, what nobody understood, was who Julian actually was. When Julian arrived in Gaul and saw the state of the legions, something changed in him. These weren't the disciplined killing machines of Rome's golden age. These were defeated men, hungry, unpaid, forgotten. Their morale was shattered, their equipment was falling apart. They expected nothing but death. But instead of accepting his role as a figurehead, Julian got to work. He started training with the soldiers himself. He studied military tactics with the same intensity he'd once devoted to philosophy. He reorganized supply lines. He restored discipline. He ate what his men ate, slept where they slept. And slowly something shifted. The soldiers started believing again, not in Rome necessarily, but in him. By August of 357, Julian was ready. He marched his rebuilt legions toward the city of Argentoratum, what we now call Strasbourg, where the Alamanni had gathered their full strength. And when I say full strength, I mean it, 35,000 warriors. That's the number the ancient sources give us. 35,000 screaming Germanic fighters, led by King Chnodomar himself. They had chosen their position carefully. Their backs were against thick forests where they'd hidden ambush parties. They held the high ground. They had every advantage. Cnodomar was so confident in victory that he did something unusual. He dismounted from his horse. He would fight on foot, side by side with his men. This wasn't just bravado, it was a message. There would be no retreat, no escape. Today, Rome would finally fall. Against this horde stood 13,000 Romans. Think about that for a moment. Nearly 3 enemies for every legionary. Well, but these weren't the legionaries you might picture from movies about Caesar or Augustus. The Roman army had evolved. These were comitatenses, mobile field army troops, and auxilia palatina, specialized infantry units. They wore chainmail instead of the old segmented plate armor. They carried oval shields instead of the rectangular scutum. Their swords were the longer spatha, better for slashing in fluid combat. There was also the heavy cavalry, the cataphracts. Men and horses wrapped entirely in iron scales and mail, living tanks, essentially, the finest mounted warriors Rome could field. But even with these elite troops, the numbers were terrifying. The day was brutally hot, August sun beating down, dust everywhere, coating throats and stinging eyes. And then, across the field, the Alamanni began their war ritual, the Berytus. It started low, a deep, rumbling hum from 35,000 throats. Then it grew, louder, louder still. Building like thunder rolling across mountains until it seemed like the earth itself was screaming. The sound was designed to do one thing: break the enemy's spirit before the first blow was even struck. The Romans stood silent, waiting, and then hell opened up. The battle started badly, very badly. On the Roman right flank, the cataphracts charged forward, expecting to smash through the Germanic lines with sheer weight and momentum. But the Alamanni had seen heavy cavalry before. They knew exactly how to fight it. Light infantry, fast, agile warriors slipped between the horses. They went low. They went for the one place the armor didn't cover, the bellies of the horses. Imagine it. These massive armored beasts suddenly screaming, collapsing, throwing their riders to the ground. Within minutes, the Roman cavalry was in chaos. Men were being butchered before they could even stand. And then came the worst possible outcome. The cavalry broke. They ran. Rome's finest mounted warriors, fleeing like panicked animals. The right flank was collapsing. If it fell completely, the Alamanni could sweep around and encircle the entire Roman army. It would be a massacre. The battle would be over in minutes. This was the moment, the tipping point, the instant where everything could have ended. And this is where Julian became something more than a commander. He saw the collapse happening. He saw his cavalry routing. And instead of staying in the rear where emperors and generals were supposed to stay, safe behind layers of bodyguards, Julian kicked his horse forward. He rode directly into the chaos. He grabbed the unit standard, the purple dragon banner that represented Roman authority, and he started waving it frantically, screaming at his men, calling them cowards, demanding they turn and fight. Picture this scene. A young man who'd been reading philosophy books 3 years ago, it now covered in dust and sweat, holding a battle standard while arrows flew and men died around him, refusing to let his army collapse. It worked. The cavalrymen saw their Caesar there in the mud with them. They saw that he wasn't running. Shame is a powerful weapon. They stopped fleeing. They regrouped. They turned back to face the enemy. The right flank held, barely, but it held. Meanwhile, in the center of the battlefield, something ancient and terrible was happening. The Roman infantry had locked shields, the famous wall of wood and iron that had conquered the known world. And the Alamanni were throwing themselves against it like waves against a cliff. They tried everything. They grabbed at the shields, trying to tear them away. They leaped over the formation, trying to get behind it. They hacked with axes and slashed with long swords, hammering at the Roman line with all their fury. And the Romans? They gave ground, step by step. Yet they were pushed backward by the sheer weight of numbers pressing against them. But here's what the Alamanni didn't understand about Roman soldiers. They fought as one organism. When a man fell, another immediately stepped into his place. The line never broke. It bent. It retreated. But it never shattered. Every legionary knew that his survival depended on the man next to him, and that man's survival depended on him. This wasn't individual heroism. This was discipline transformed into something almost mechanical. The center became a grinding nightmare. Spatha against ass. Shield against shield, men screaming, bleeding, dying in the crush, bodies piling up until soldiers were fighting on top of corpses. And then came the moment the Alamanni thought they'd won. A group of noble warriors, the elite fighters of the Germanic tribes, finally managed to punch through the Roman front line. They broke the formation. They were inside. Which for one glorious moment, they must have believed they'd done it. They'd cracked the legendary Roman discipline. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Behind the first Rhine, Julian had positioned his strategic reserve, the Primani, veterans of 100 battles, the hardest men in the Roman army. When those Germanic nobles broke through, expecting to find chaos and routing soldiers, they instead found themselves surrounded by killers who had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. The Primani didn't retreat. They didn't flinch. They closed around the breakthrough like a fist, and they slaughtered every single one of those elite warriors. And that's when the Alamanni broke. When the Germanic fighters saw their best warriors cut down after penetrating the Roman line, when they realized that even success meant death, the fear spread through them like fire through dry grass. First, a few turned to run, then more, then the entire army. What had been a battle became a hunt. The Romans pursued without mercy. They drove the fleeing Alamanni all the way to the banks of the Rhine. Thousands of Germanic warriors trapped against the water with no bridge, no boats, no escape. They tried to swim. Many drowned under the weight of their own weapons and armor. Others were shot with arrows while desperately paddling for the far shore. The river ran red. When the killing finally stopped, the numbers were almost impossible to believe. Roman dead, 243 soldiers, 4 officers. Alamanni dead, over 6,000 on the field alone. Countless more drowned in the river. King Chnodomir himself was found hiding in a swamp, dragged out covered in mud, and brought in chains before Julian. The man who had dismounted because he was so certain of victory now knelt begging for his life at the feet of the young philosopher everyone had expected to die. Chnodomir was sent to Rome in disgrace. He died of old age in a forgotten prison camp, stripped of every shred of dignity he'd once possessed. Now here's where the story gets complicated. After the battle, as the sun set over fields covered with enemy dead, Julian's soldiers did something dangerous. They lifted him on their shields and tried to proclaim him Augustus, full emperor. Think about what that meant. Constantius II was still alive, still ruling. If Julian accepted that title, it would be open rebellion. Civil war. Romans killing Romans while the borders burned. Julian refused. He actually rebuked his own troops for the offer. He understood that the timing was wrong, that accepting would undo everything they'd just achieved. Now, his true ascension would come 3 years later in the city of Lutetia, modern Paris, when political circumstances finally forced his hand. The Battle of Strasbourg secured the Gallic frontier for another generation. It proved that Roman military discipline, even in an age of decline, could still achieve the impossible. And it transformed a sacrificial lamb into a legend, a philosopher emperor who would later be remembered as Julian the Apostate for his attempts to restore the old pagan gods. But that's a story for another time. What matters right now is this. A man everyone expected to fail, expected to die quietly on a forgotten frontier, instead delivered one of the most perfect military victories in ancient history. He did it through discipline, through personal courage, and through refusing to accept the role others had written for him. Sometimes the people who change history are the ones nobody was watching. If this story hit different, if you felt something watching a man prove everyone wrong against impossible odds, then do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me what other forgotten battles you want to hear about. I'll see you in the next one.